Welcome to this third webinar. It's great to have so many people here again. This is our third webinar in a series of 3, which have focused on looking at carers perhaps thinking about going back to the workplace, either where their caring circumstances change for whatever reason. And we put this together with the help and support of a grant that we've received from the Dementia Services Development Trust. So a big shout out and thanks to them for helping us to do this, which is part of a 6-month project looking at and considering return to work. In week 1, we had a speaker talk about the skills that employers are looking for in the workplace, and actually how so many of those skills are skills that you develop as a carer in your caring role. And I'm really pleased to say our speaker Susan has joined us this afternoon, so it's great to see that she's amongst the people joining us. So thank you, Susan, for joining us. I know over in Florida it's a completely different time zone, so thank you. Then in the second week, we had 2 carers giving us some really heartfelt stories about how they found the skills they've developed as carers have helped them in the workplace, and how they've kind of almost made them better employees or more useful in their roles. So that's been really great. And this week, as I say, we're joined by Dr. Gemima Fitzgerald, who many of you have seen on lots of things we've done before now. And Gemima is a clinical psychologist with a special interest in resilience and emotional well-being. So we're going to have a conversation with Gemima today about resilience and well-being and the emotional and psychological needs you might have if you're considering returning to work or have returned to work. And then once we've heard from Gemima for about 20 minutes, we'll be going into some breakout rooms. And the breakout rooms will allow us in small groups to discuss some of the thoughts that people have and the experiences people have to make it a richer experience for everybody. And after we've done the breakout rooms, we'll come back together and the facilitators of those breakout rooms will feed back to the wider group. So that gives us all an opportunity to hear from each other, but without anyone feeling they've got to speak up in large groups, because I know that's quite tricky for some people. And so please bear with the breakout rooms. You don't have to say anything if you don't want to, and you won't be recorded in the breakout rooms either. You'll be able to turn your cameras on without the fear of being recorded in any way, because those will not be recorded. And then once we come back from the breakout rooms, as I say, the facilitators will feed back and we'll have some final words from Gemima. But the one thing I forgot to mention, Gemima, you should have pulled me up, is it's not just Gemima. We're also by video going to be joined by Dawn Newey. And Dawn and Gemima did a Facebook Live a couple of weeks ago, and it was looking at this topic of emotional and psychological needs when returning to work. Dawn unfortunately couldn't be with us this afternoon to do the webinar. She's an executive coach and an accredited career consultant, and she's also an unpaid carer for her mother. But what Dawn has kindly done is done some recordings. So intermingled with talking to Gemima about her thoughts and feelings on the subject, we'll also put a little bit of work in from Dawn, and Dawn's given us some final keywords at the end of this webinar to share with you as well. So I hope that all makes sense. And so, as I say, I'm going to have a chat with Gemima now for about 20 minutes. Gemima, thank you so much for joining us. Is there anything else you want to say on your introduction as to who you are before we kick off on emotional and psychological needs in the workplace?
No, thank you. I think you've given me a lovely introduction. Thanks, Sue. And yeah, no, just to say that I'm a clinical psychologist. It's lovely to be here today. Yeah, and I'm really happy to sort of input into this webinar series because it's really important.
It is, isn't it? And I think there must be an awful lot of emotional challenges of returning to work and lots of thoughts and feelings that people must go through. And I wondered if you could share some of your thoughts about that.
Yeah, it's tough, isn't it? And, for the people listening today, it's, the thought of going back to work, just the thought of it sometimes is really daunting. And we know that if you've had a career break for any reason, people's confidence tends to have a big dip. So, and I think especially when you've been a carer, a family carer, to then consider going back into the workplace, which is a really positive move, it can be really overwhelming, the thought of it, because times have changed, things have moved on, and perhaps you felt quite isolated in your caring role. And there might be lots of reasons why maybe your confidence has taken a dip. So we know that confidence is something that people really struggle with often at the thought of going back to work. Sometimes people, you know, that there'll be a multitude of reasons why you might be considering going back, but sometimes people feel guilty about going back to work, you know, because it's a transition, isn't it? Going back to work, even if it's a positive, even if it's something you really want to do, you're also kind of ending another chapter, the old chapter. And so for whatever reason that is, it could be that, you know, you've got more support at home, so you don't need to be there all the time. It could be that your person has gone into a care home. It could be that the person has died. You know, there's lots of different reasons why you might be thinking about going back to work. But whatever that reason is, sometimes people say they can feel a sense of guilt because they're shutting the door of a chapter and moving into a new one. And that's positive, but also comes with sometimes a sense of loss. It might not do for you, but sometimes it can. So we know that that's another thing. Sometimes people, should I just talk about some of the things that maybe people feel like when they're worried about?
I think that'd be really helpful, Gemima. I mean, I think some of the things you've said already, you've said it can be tough, it can be daunting, it can be overwhelming. There's this guilt as perhaps the end of a chapter, and that end of a chapter, I think you said, could be multitude of reasons. It could be that the person has died, or it could be that they've moved into a different caring situation. Yeah. And I think you also touched on with that the idea of grief as well. So anything else you could tell us around those sorts of topics would be fantastic.
And I think, yeah, exactly. And I think also the shift in identity, you know, maybe you've thought of yourself as being at home with your person that you're caring for. That's been a massive part of your life. And suddenly you're going back into a more professional environment. And that can feel really scary and a bit like, you know, a bit kind of a shift of identity, like, oh, can I mix in that environment again? Will I fit in? Sometimes it comes with a sense of imposter syndrome. I don't know if people here have heard of imposter syndrome, where, you know, they say that 70% of people feel it anyway, let alone when you've had a break from work. So that feeling of like, oh gosh, I'm not as good as people think I am, or I'm going to get found out, or maybe I've just, you know, got a job, been offered a job, but I don't think they realize that I'm not quite as good as I sold myself to be, or I haven't really got the skills, or, you know, if people realize that I'm not as good as they think, then I'm going to get in trouble, or I'm going to get the sack, and all of those sort of fears, which can cause anxiety. And anything new can cause anxiety for all of us. You know, none of us like to be put into situations that we're not used to. You know, they call it the comfort zone for a reason. You know, when we're comfortable in situations that we've been in a lot of times, that feels okay. That feels sometimes quite nice. It's comfortable. But coming out of the comfort zone into something completely new is really challenging, really challenging. So yeah, I mean, I'm glad we're doing this topic, because for anyone watching here today, you know, it might well be that they're thinking, I'm really scared.
And it was really interesting hearing you, Gemima, say that 70% of us suffer with imposter syndrome anyway. I know when we did the Facebook Live the other week, all three of us quickly put our hands up, didn't we? 100%. So if you have been out of the workplace, I think what you're saying, one of the key messages, you may well have imposter syndrome, and you might worry, is it walk the talk that they say? Can you do that? But actually, even for those that haven't been out of the workplace, there's something comforting knowing that everyone, or a lot of people, have imposter syndrome.
I think that's one of the best ways of kind of tackling imposter syndrome, if you like, is to know that most people that are in the room with you are thinking the same things, you know, or similar things. They're feeling it as well. So we're not as different we're all unique, but we have a lot of similarities, you know, as human beings. So yeah, that feeling of, gosh, you know, people are everyone's better than me. I'm not as good as everyone else. All of that stuff, most people feel it.
Okay, so what I'd like to do, Gemima, is just kind of reassuring people. We've talked so far about a lot of feelings that can feel quite negative, don't we? That feel of it being told tough, daunting, overwhelming, imposter syndrome, low self-confidence. And just to reassure everyone listening, we are actually going to come on to some of the things that you can do to help that. Some really
I'm going to leave you there.
things that can happen. We're nearly there. But I'd just like to, because you talked about confidence, but you also mentioned in there that, that fear that times have changed, and that it might be a different place to go into the workplace than it used to be. So I'm just going to share a bit of footage, if it's okay, from Dawn speaking, who talks about confidence and also about how times have changed. And that, I think, will lead us really nicely into some positive thoughts about what you can do about all of these feelings and emotions that are going on. So let's hope this is going to help work. I'm not usually the most technically apt person, but we're going to give it a go. Okay, so can you see, Gemima, can you see that screen now?
I can see it. I can see it.
So I'm going to play this now. It's just a minute or so long.
Following the pandemic, a lot of organisations are advertising roles on fixed-term contracts. So it may well be that they just have a particular project going, so the desire for a member of staff to join the team is for a defined period. And it may well be that it's appropriate for you to try out these short-term contracts, or maybe do some agency work where you may be working for a company 1 week and then working for a different company another week or another month. But we're talking short-term contracts, whether it's days, months, or just maybe up to a year. The benefit to you of a carer moving back into the workplace is that you can test out a company. You can actually be physically in the organisation, doing some work, finding out what it's really like in there, seeing if it's the sort of place you would like to work if a permanent position came along, and all the time building up your confidence and your skills, and you gaining some experience. And if that contract finishes, you move on to the next one. And from that, you'll gain a lot more experience, and all of that can go into your CV. Like with the volunteering, if you do choose to volunteer, you're building your confidence all the time and you are gaining experience. And again, that can go into your CV. Following the pandemic, a lot of organisations are...
Sorry, let me just stop that. It started replaying itself. I'm sorry about that. Right, we're back in the room. So I think one of the things, I hope everyone could hear it okay. Dawn was saying that actually since the pandemic, things almost might give you some opportunities to have more confidence, because there are short-term contracts, fixed-term contracts, and various things. I don't know if you've got any thoughts on what Dawn said, and also moving forward, other strategies people can employ.
Yeah, I think the great thing about a short-term or fixed-term contract might be just dips your toe in the water, doesn't it? And I think anything that doesn't feel quite as big is really helpful. So I kind of thought about things that might help with our emotions and our psychology as we're preparing to go back into the workplace, or as we are back at work, and kind of falls into 3 categories. The first category is how you build up that confidence with a sense of mastery. So that's kind of learning to achieve small goals and feeling successful in small things. So we don't have to conquer the big things at first. It's about building up. So I remember when we did our Facebook Live, there was a lovely comment from one of our carers that said that they were really nervous about going on public transport to work again. That was one of the things that they just had built up in their heads. And so they decided to go and travel on a Sunday, just get used to going on the bus on a Sunday when it was quiet, and that kind of prepared them then for the busier journey during the rush hour times. So trying to find ways of building up your confidence. It could be volunteering, it could be just getting out there a bit more with your social circle, just maybe going out in busier places. It depends what your fears are, really, what they're related to, but trying to break it down into small, achievable steps that you can actually be proud of yourself and say, yeah, I'm doing this, I'm getting ready. So there's that. I think in terms of when we have low self-confidence, it's that fear that we might not be able to be successful in a particular environment. So learning that we can be successful, building that up in small steps is really good. The second stage that we can really look at is around encouragement from other people, using our support network. Hopefully you've all got people in your life, or a person in your life that is encouraging. So trying to find people that will give you some positive feedback. because, you know, sometimes we're our own worst critics, especially when our confidence is low. So finding people that will encourage us and say, come on, you can do this, or, you know, that was really good that you did that. And that can be people outside of work, but also once you've gone back into work, finding people in your workplace, whether that's people in your office, a colleague, identifying somebody that you think actually this person could be someone who maybe can just get alongside me a bit and maybe give me some feedback. Ask for feedback. That's quite a brave thing to do when you're feeling scared and unconfident. But, you know, if you've just started in a new job, you know, ask for feedback. Say, I've done that in jobs before where I've said, look, I'm somebody who just likes to know that I'm doing all right. And if I'm not doing all right, please tell me, and then I can try and fix it. But I need feedback. And I think if you actually ask for that, that's really important, because it's amazing how people forget that others need feedback, you know, and actually it can really help to build our confidence. So I would definitely say that. And the third thing that's really, really important, that's within our control to try and help us, is how we manage our own thoughts and our own behaviour and our own sort of psychological well-being to build our resilience while we're at work and when we get home. So that's sometimes, you know, I don't know about you, Sue, but I often have had a critical inner voice in my life, and most people have. So by that, what I mean is, you know, that voice in your head that's kind of telling you, oh, you've made such an idiot of yourself today, or you weren't very good, or nobody likes you. So just when you notice, if you notice that you're having those sort of thoughts in your head, just know that a thought is not a fact. Just because you think it, it doesn't mean it's true. And just try and bring in something that's a bit kinder, a bit of a kinder voice. So what would you say to the people that you love in this world? If you've got people that you love and they were struggling and they were thinking that they're a bit of a failure, or everyone's laughing at them, or no one likes them, what would you say to encourage them? And whatever it is, then that's probably what you need to hear too. So say it to yourself. You know, there's no such thing as you being mad if you talk out loud. Like, do it. Like, just say it to yourself, whether you say it out loud or whether you say it in your head. But I think when you're going home, whether it's in your car or when you get home on your own, speaking positive things to yourself out loud can be really helpful. I think also visualizing. So just imagine yourself going back to work, or maybe going in for that interview, or whatever it is that you're a bit daunted by, and imagine yourself walking in and being confident and being good at it, and people liking you and warming to you. And it's amazing the power of just visualizing that in terms of just preparing yourself emotionally, because it can just start to settle you. And so, you know, your imagination, your brain doesn't really know the difference between what's imagined future and what has actually happened. So it can just help to try and visualize some things that are really like you winning at things, you being successful. There are some really practical things you can do as well. Like I love the tip about drinking water. So, you know, so for anyone listening, when we feel anxious, you know that feeling of you get a dry mouth, and that's because our mouths dry up when we're feeling anxious. All the saliva drains from our mouth because we don't need our digestive system. It's that really sort of primitive fight or flight response. So all your resources, your blood, everything is rushing to your limbs to fight or flight because you're feeling scared and anxious. So that's why we get a dry mouth, because you're not supposed to be you don't need saliva if you're in a life and death situation. So your brain has kind of wrongly assessed that this is a really life-threatening situation. So what we can do is kind of reverse psychology, is have a few sips of water, and that kickstarts your digestive system again. It just gets the saliva going again in your mouth. And that tricks your brain into thinking, oh, this isn't a life and death situation. I'm totally safe. And it can just calm and ground you a bit, as can deep breathing. You know, I know, Sue, you've talked a lot about breathing exercises in the past and I love that. I use that a lot in my own life, just taking some nice, slow, deep breaths in through the nose, out through the mouth, just really reduces your blood pressure. It can slow down your heart rate and just bring a sense of calm and peace and being more grounded to prepare you for kind of going back into that work environment.
Thank you, Gemima. Just so many things in there.
So much I could say. Yeah.
There is, and I know there's so much you could say, because they're all things, I mean, I've worked with you a number of years, and so much of it I take on board. I think some of the things you've said, linking with what Dawn said, dip your toe, it's a mastery of skills, isn't it? Having small goals. And like you, it stood out for me on the Facebook Live when the lady said about taking the bus and doing it on a Sunday, first of all, doing those gradual steps. The one I think I've always taken for you, and whenever we do these things I talk about, is this idea that a thought is not a fact. That sometimes our brains can run away with themselves about thinking about what might be happening in the future. It doesn't know what's going to happen in the future. So you can visualize it working really well, and you can visualize it as being a complete disaster, can't you? But also we are our own greatest critics. I mean, we started this webinar, if I'm honest with everyone here, I think I completely messed up the introduction. I think I waffled all over the place, and maybe I did. But when I came to the end of it, I had to say to myself, look, a thought is not a fact. Wait till afterwards and then get feedback. Otherwise, you can't keep going, can you? It's about doing things in tiny steps and recognizing what you know, what you don't know, but then asking for feedback and using that feedback, because none of us can grow, none of us can learn unless we ask for feedback. And actually, I think employers really like that. And it talks to what Susan said in the first week, is they want people who are going to grow. And so they want people who are open to feedback. So I think, like you, that feeling about a thought is not a fact, the breathing, the drinking the water. Now, everyone at Dementia Carers Count now knows why I drink buckets of water before I Facebook Live. I'm there with a sip of water, because it really helps.
Exactly. You'll see it on chat shows where a guest goes on, the first thing they do, they walk on someone like the Jonathan Ross show, and they'll take a sip of water because they're nervous.
Yeah. And sometimes you see it if they're asked an awkward question, and we always think, oh, it's just a delay tactic, but it's not, is it? It's about just getting yourself calm enough. And the other one I think sometimes that we've talked about is the grounding, where you get both feet on the ground. It kind of stabilizes you, doesn't it? If you can feel the ground through your feet, it makes you feel much more solid.
Yeah, 100%. I think that's really, really helpful. And also just to know, when you're feeling anxious, and most people listening now will know the feeling of fear and anxiety, whatever that feels like. So it might be that your heart races. It might be that you feel like you can't settle, you're jittery, you might feel a bit sick. Whatever it is, actually, what goes on in your body when you're feeling anxious is pretty much physiologically identical to when we're feeling excited. So if you can just tell yourself, I'm just excited, I'm just preparing myself for a challenge, just try and change that inner narrative in your head about what actually is going on. You're not scared and nervous. You can do this. Your body's just rising to the challenge. And I think sometimes just little things like that can just flick us out of fear.
I think we both did that before this webinar, actually, didn't we?
Yeah,
we were slightly nervous, but we both actually said, no, we're excited about this. We love doing this. And it does work. Hopefully it does work for people. So lots of things to think about, lots of things that can support your psychological needs and your emotional needs. So we're going to give everyone the opportunity now to go into breakout rooms. Once you get into the breakout rooms, you won't be recorded. So we'd really encourage, if you can, to turn your cameras on. Really grateful to all the staff at Dementia Carers Count, where a number of staff have agreed to come along and help out at this webinar. So they will be your facilitators in your groups, and they'll take some notes so that they can feed back to the main group at the end some of the things that were said, but it will be confidential. They won't identify anybody by name or anything like that. So do take the opportunity to listen to each other and to share your stories. In one moment, you'll have a box come up on the screen that says you're being invited to a breakout room, and then just press OK, and it will take you through to the breakout room where you'll meet one of the facilitators from Dementia Carers Count. They have a couple of questions. You don't have to stick to those questions, but the questions we've got, if I can read my little piece of paper here, is when you're considering going back into work, what do you think is perhaps holding you back psychologically, emotionally? Is there anything that's holding you back? And what tips has this webinar with Gemima and Dawn given you that you could apply in the workplace or perhaps at home to help you cope with the situation you're in at the moment, or how you want to change your situation? So those are the key questions, but the facilitators will be there in the breakout rooms. have about 10-15 minutes in the breakout rooms, and then we'll come back to here. So if technology is working, this should all happen now. Hello everyone, welcome back. Are we all back? I think we are. So if we could just, what we're going to do is go around the DCC or the Dementia Carers Count staff who facilitated the room, and thank you everyone, just to give just a very, very quick couple of points of the key take-homes from those rooms. Time is getting on, so I am going to keep you to time. Helen Piper, I'm going to keep you to time on a brief feedback, if that's okay. So I'm just going to go to people as I see them on the screen. Kate Legg, can I come to your group first?
Yeah, thanks, Sue. So we had quite a chat about this balance. We were talking a little bit about the balance between, you might have started off working full time and then you might have reduced down to part time or weekly. You might want to go back full time, and it's getting that balance between what works for you. It could be that voluntary work works for you. It could be that the short-term contracts work for you. So that was one of the discussions, but also thinking about the balance between your needs and the person you're caring for, and you know, trying to look after yourself in the process and not feel guilty about doing that, because especially some people, a lot of people were still in caring roles, so they might even be balancing a bit of part-time work and still caring and kind of looking after their own well-being. So we were talking about those and just generally thinking about some of the points like drinking water, breathing, exercising, positive thinking, and that sort of imagining yourself doing something really well. That was a summary.
Brilliant, thanks Kate. So lots of the tips that Gemima had come up with, but also that idea of dip your toe maybe with short-term contracts, voluntary. Thank you. Can I come to Amy?
Yes, of course. So we had a similar situation actually, and there was a lot of talk about the short-term benefits to sort of maybe trying a contract or something like you said, so you're dipping your toe. We were also talking about that one person was actually starting a new job very shortly and had concerns about, you know, the person that they had, you know, were caring for, even though new plans were in place. So there was also that anxiety around just the huge change in circumstances and sort of, you know, what would happen in the future. But that sort of led back to sort of thoughts aren't facts, which was a really key point which was taken, I think, from the group. Also, we discussed how important it is to take time for yourself. You know, take that time out and really look after yourself, which is key in all these situations. And also that there's never any harm in admitting that you're not okay, you know, and that communication side of things is paramount. It's very, very hard to admit that sometimes, but just by opening that conversation up, can make all the difference. In confidence as well, that can really help, you know, just admitting that things aren't okay and hopefully starting to get that support can absolutely build your confidence, and, you know, you can continue down a really positive path, hopefully. And the other thing that we were just discussing was that sort of there was the discussion talked about if you're the worry about sometimes being a carer is that actually sort of flipping it around, and sometimes you're no longer seen as a professional, and so that's sort of flipping it around, as in you might have been, you know, a professional worker, and then your job as a carer you can feel like that you're no longer seen as that professional, and possibly not listened to so much, and then possibly the confidence is lost, and then trying to get back into the workplace, that's also a difficulty. So yes, we had a discussion, a really good discussion. I think those were the main points.
Sounds fantastic, Amy. And I think that, you know, again, we've got the things around the anxiety and the fear, but time for yourself and resilience, that's come up, I think, with Kate yourself as well, is that, and we do a live online learning session around resilience and looking after yourself. So for anybody on this call, just that our general session and live online learning that is around resilience, wellbeing, looking after yourself is really beneficial. So we can also put that link into the email for you as well when you receive the email after this. And just urge anyone who didn't see it to watch webinar 1, and we can send the links to that, in which Susan talked about you absolutely have developed professional skills in your caring role, and hopefully that will boost confidence as well. Helen, can I come to you?
Yes, you can. We had a great discussion about actually all the group was still carers, so it was very much focused on that whole sort of juggling and kind of coping with your identity as a carer but going back into work. And we had different situations, so some felt pressured to go back, others were dying to go back but were feeling slightly challenged by the very idea of it. And you know, and there was obviously the issue with the juggling the time, what came through was there just wasn't enough care packages, so there were one of the big barriers was just not thinking that the person they were caring for would have the support they needed, and so that they'd be continually juggling regardless of going back to work. Some of the issues raised included imposter syndrome, that actually lots had already changed, even over a matter of months. Industries had changed, so maybe practices or the way things are done, which obviously then increases that fear and that worry of imposter syndrome, and that, you know, that things had moved on. Another worry was confidence, of course, but also just the sense of, you know, that sometimes in caring your world shrinks a little to really focus on the person you're caring for. You stop thinking of yourself nearly as much. You know, we talked about the fact that you tend to not prioritize what you need, and so that then in the end, you know, that confidence, that, you know, that almost like the small steps you were talking about, kind of building up gradually to kind of going back into the world, if you like. And finally, one thing that we discussed that also worked was volunteering, like you suggested, but sort of in a way, because even though it takes up time, and whether you can really justify that's where you want to spend your time, it was the time that people felt like they could be them, and it made them feel that they could be doing what they wanted to do and what interests them, and it gave them just a little bit more, you know, a wider world, if you like.
Thanks, Helen.
That was quick enough.
Thank you. Yeah, because we're kind of getting short of time. Just to come, one thing I want to say before I move on to Rachel and then Kirsty is Gemima did do a Facebook Live for us quite a few weeks ago, which was around feelings of guilt and grief, and that idea about the pressure of things and feeling challenged by it. So that's on our YouTube channel, and that's a really use, may well help people as well, those how to deal with those emotions. Thank you. Rachel.
Thanks, Sue. So the main consideration we discussed in going back to work was the lack of confidence and the anxiety around, will you cope with returning to the workplace? How have things changed? And so we talked a lot about the techniques, the breathing exercises, taking a drink of water, those various techniques to calm that. We also spoke about the guilt, not only the guilt of leaving the person that you care for to go to work, but also the guilt of potentially having to take time off of work, particularly at short notice, because of your caring role, and the guilt of asking people to step in for you at the last minute, worries around employers being understanding. So I think that's quite a worry for people looking at going back into the workforce as well. And just general concerns about how understanding employers will be. And just how when you are looking at going back to work and you are interviewing for jobs, it's about understanding whether your employer will be supportive to your needs, as well as if you're the right fit for them. Are they the right fit for you, and are they going to be able to offer you the support that you need as a carer and an employee? And just making sure that you've got those support networks in place if you are dealing with those issues and that guilt and the stress of both caring and working, just making sure that you know that those support networks are there, whether it's a carers group or whether it's friends and family, they're there for you when you need it. So.
Thank you, Rachel. And that idea about carers supporting employers supporting carers in the workplace is really, really important. And Helen has been doing some work around that. We can signpost people to that as well in the email. You're going to get a very large email here. Kirsty.
I see. Well, I think what's been so nice about listening to this is I don't think I've got that much to add, because the topics have all been covered. The one thing that we talked about that I don't think has just been covered by everyone is just the feeling of not going back into the same kind of position that you were in before. So if you were in a senior management position and then having to compromise, it feels like you're compromising your role when you're going back in and juggling those circumstances, and that's emotionally very difficult to handle, especially if you've been building up through a career. But otherwise, it's been so lovely to see familiar faces in my group, and I had a really lovely mix of people who were already working and caring, and so could really offer some great tips to the other people who are looking to, or at least, you know, starting that journey to go back again.
Thank you, Kirsty. So if Rob could pin me and Gemima again, if everyone else wants to turn their videos off, we'll just do the final thoughts. I'm going to share a couple of final thoughts from Dawn and then hand over to Gemima for her final thoughts. It may take us 1 minute or so over. Hopefully you can stay with us. But let me share my screen for a final thought from Dawn. Oh, share sound first, that would be help. Okay, here we go. You can see that, Gemima? Yeah.
Yeah. What I would say is there's no perfect candidate. All of us have got a development need somewhere, no matter what we choose to do. So give it a go. If you don't give it a go, you'll never know. And if you are rejected, if you don't succeed at the interview and you're picked to the post, as Gemima said earlier, learn from it, grow. Get some feedback, ask for what you did well. We need to bolster our confidence. So you must have done something well. So ask for what things you did well, and as well as the development areas. Then reflect on it, refine your approach, but keep going, don't give up. And I'm sure that if you sort of focus on the step-by-step rather than the whole staircase, you will eventually land that role.
So I think that's a lovely message from Dawn. Is sort of slightly different to what we were talking about, but very much about confidence and an idea of a staircase, small steps at a time, and ask for feedback. So Gemima, can I pass to you, having heard all the facilitators' feedback and Dawn's comments there? Anything from you?
Well, yes. So final thoughts. I mean, I suppose listening to everyone's feedback, thank you so much for having such amazing discussions. It makes me realise, you know, what a huge topic this is. And, you know, we've only really skimmed the surface in this webinar, but there's so much more to talk about. And I think your discussions really showed that. I'd just like to say, you know, we all go through life. We're all learning as we go through life. You don't have to be perfect. Sometimes we can be so hard on ourselves and set this really high standard that we don't set for others, that we set for ourselves. You know, the fact that you've been a carer, or you are a carer, and you are also considering work is wonderful. It's good if that's the right thing for you right now. This, you know, take the pressure off yourself. You don't have to be perfect. There's a saying, you know, sometimes you win, sometimes you lose. I like to think sometimes you win, sometimes you learn. You know, if it doesn't go well, just what can you learn from it? And, you know, as I said before, you know, about the comfort zone, if you push yourself out of your comfort zone, there's no growth in the comfort zone. That's when we grow, is when we try new things. So just be gentle on yourself. And just know that, you know, if you're making any steps in the right direction, then that's a really great thing. You're building your repertoire of skills and of, you know, confidence. And, you know, you don't have to do this perfectly. We're all human beings and we're all just trying. That's what I'd like to say.
And I think it was brilliantly said, Gemima. Thank you so much. And one of the things you said, there is so much more to talk about. And that's not as much as this is the last of the 3 webinars, it's definitely not the end of what Dementia Carers Account hopes to do. So please keep an eye on what we're doing, because we do want to talk about it more. We do want to develop some more things and support for people, perhaps some ideas around what to look for in a workplace and everything like that. But it brings us to the end of the webinar. We're going to put a Zoom poll up on the screen now, and we'd really value your thoughts. It's just a couple of clicks in a couple of boxes, but it really helps us out. So Gemima and I, at this point, we're going to say goodbye. Thank you so much for joining us. Once you've filled in the Zoom poll, then that's the point where you can depart. And thank you. Keep an eye on the website. We'll send you an email with the recording and the other links we've talked about, and hope to see you at future events as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you.